Great, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. My name is Gretchen Muller, and I will be facilitating the call for today. Welcome to the 2021 Stormwater Code and Manual Update presentation. We've got full agenda for today. We'll be meeting until 5 o'clock, and I'm going to go over a set of ground rules on the next slide. Just in terms of best practices for WebEx, we've got several folks on the call, and we also have several presenters. And so just want to walk through a few ground rules that will help be most respectful of everybody's time and participation today. And asking folks to use your computer to connect to the WebEx, use the chat function throughout the course of this presentation, submit any questions that you may have, and comments for the presenters. Ideally using a headset or taking the call from a quiet space to reduce background noise and potential for echo. And we've got everybody muted right now to help with that. But keeping your phone or your headset muted unless you're speaking to the group, and we'll actually be muting all the participants on the call until the Q&A, but we will be monitoring the chat function throughout the course of the presentation. And you'll notice on the far right-hand side of your screen, we've got an initial poll question that we'd love for folks to answer in the next minute or two. Really wanting to know who's on the call and what your entity you represent in terms of whether you're a jurisdiction, a consultant, so looking for that, so folks can take a minute to answer that question. And I also do want to let folks know that we are recording this, and a link to the recording will be posted on the CPI website. If you have any issues with technology throughout the course of this presentation, if you're having issues with the chat function or the hand raise feature function, Brett Edgar is on the call for IT support, and he can be reached in a couple of different ways. He's on the call, so if you're wanting to reach him via chat, he's the Cascadia Consulting entity that you can reach out to him privately. We also have listed here his phone number and his email address as well, so several different ways to get in touch with him.
Hey, Gretchen, can I add? This is Brent. There are two Cascadia Consultings. Gretchen's one and I am the other. So if you're confused by that, that is what that is.
Great, thanks, Brent. So we are meeting from 3:15 to 5 p.m. today, and as I mentioned, we have a lot to cover. So we are going to be keeping everybody on mute, monitoring the chat function throughout the presentation, and we'll be addressing any clarifying questions related to content that's being presented throughout the course of this as we are able. And then during the Q&A, we will either respond to questions submitted via the chat function, or we will unmute those that raise their hands. And quick walk through of the agenda, and there's a bit of background noise, so if we can address that, that'd be great. So kicking us off, welcome and introductions. In a second, I'll walk through who the presenters are for the day. We'll then we'll go through the project background and the status update, hear what the key stormwater code updates are, as well as the stormwater manual updates. We'll walk through next steps, and then we will open it up at around 4:40 today for question and answer. Walkthrough of who's on the call today. Myself, Gretchen Muller, a senior associate at Cascadia Consulting Group. And my role in the project to date has been to provide communication support to this project and this effort. And I'll be serving as a facilitator on the call today. We're also joined by Sherelle Ehlers from the Stormwater Policy Advisor at Seattle Public Utilities. She's the Seattle Public Utilities Program Manager for this project and is also leading the Stormwater Code and Volume 1 updates. She will be the lead presenter on the key Stormwater Code updates today. Matthew Bateman from SDCI, who's a member of the city's core team for this effort, and he's provided input on the submittal requirements and design criteria in volumes 1 and 3. He'll be presenting an update on the master use permits as part of today's presentation. And Rebecca Duglopowski, associate engineer at Herrera Environmental, and she is the consultant team project manager and will also be leading the volume 3 updates discussion today. She'll also be presenting the project background and status update, as well as the key stormwater manual updates today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over briefly to Sherelle, who's going to kick off this meeting officially with some opening remarks.
Great. Thank you, Gretchen. I just wanted to say thank you all for taking the time, and maybe turning off your microphone will be good.
Here, I'm going to mute everybody, so you'll have to unmute yourself again here.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, let's try that again. My name is Sherelle Ehlers, and thank you, Gretchen, for introducing us all. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here and attend today's meeting and your interest in Seattle Stormwater Code and Manual. We intended to have 3 actually in-person meetings, but given the way things are right now, that's not possible. But with technology, here we are, and we're having 2 separate meetings. So if you know somebody else that would like to see this presentation, there'll be a second one next week. So, and it'll cover the same topics. So we've been really busy updating the Stormwater Code and Manual. It's a big process, and it takes a lot of team players. And we've had both external and internal support on this project. And that includes SPU, Seattle Public Utilities, Seattle Department of Construction and Inspection, Seattle Department of Transportation, Parks, and some initial external input, and also a big thanks to Herrera and Cascadia. And we've been busy working on our updates with the stormwater to be equivalent with the Ecology's stormwater permit, and Rebecca will go over that a little bit more. I just wanted to say as a reminder, these are proposed changes, and of course we're relying on your public input, and then we also need Ecology's approval for our documents, especially for items that are going to the stormwater system. And eventually we will need council and mayoral approval. So these are all proposed changes. And this is our first public meeting on the update, and we'll have other opportunities to provide input that Rebecca will go over. And I'm just really thankful that you're all here, and I'm really interested in hearing your feedback before we submit our documents to Ecology. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sherelle. And now we are going to move into our first agenda item, project background and status update. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca.
All right, sounds good. So we always like to start off with a little bit of background on why we even have a stormwater code and kind of what's in the current stormwater code. So those of you that join us at the external code and manual user meeting back in the fall may recognize this slide, but looking at why we have a stormwater code in place, the key goals there are protecting life, property, and surface waters from harm, and also, of course, meeting the requirements of state and federal law. So this is a requirement under the Federal Clean Water Act, and in the state of Washington, our municipal national pollutant discharge elimination system stormwater permit. So some of the key things that are included in the stormwater code, as well as the manual, we've got source control for ongoing practices, construction site pollution prevention, and then requirements for new development and redevelopment, which include on-site stormwater management, flow control, and water quality treatment. So one of the main drivers for this project is the new Phase 1 permit that was issued on July 1st of 2019. I guess not so new anymore, but relatively new. Became effective on August 1st, 2019. And then there was also an update to the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, or what we call the Ecology Manual, along with that reissued permit. And that was posted in July 2019. We held a series of internal city staff workshops and meetings in the summer of fall of 2019. And then we had our external stakeholder code and manual user meeting last fall, and some of you were in attendance at that meeting back in October. And then this spring, we have 2 virtual public meetings. As Cheryl mentioned, today is the first of the 2 public meetings, and the next one will be on next Wednesday on May 6th. So the project is divided into 4 different phases, and so we're kind of working through the first phase of the project right now. As Sherelle mentioned, we're focusing on the required equivalency items and getting things ready for Ecology's review. That review period starts on July 1st, so we've got to wrap everything up in the next couple months and get that ready for ecology's review. So the key thing here is looking at Appendix 10 of the Phase 1 permit and addressing any items related to ecology permit equivalency. And those include things such as the new source control BMPs, updates to the construction stormwater elements to reflect the 2015-2020 construction stormwater general permit, updated wetlands guidance, etc. So there's a few items there that are required changes in the ecology permit. There's also a lot of updates that happened in the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington and the permit. Well, I guess more related to the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, but just consistency edits. There's lots of BMP edits that were updated that aren't included in that Appendix 10. So we went through those as well and adopted the ones that seemed relevant to the city as well in the City of Seattle manual. Clarifications that came from internal users and external users. So through those workshops that I mentioned on the previous slide, based on common plan submittal issues and issues raised by internal and external staff, we tried to clarify where there was some confusion related to some of the requirements. Adding and updating BMPs, as I mentioned, there's a lot of new source control BMPs. There's a few other BMPs throughout the manual that are new, and we'll highlight those in a couple minutes. And then new figures and tables to help support the text as well. So we're in this orange phase here, the April 1st to May 16th, the public review period, and then working towards that ecology submittal, as I mentioned, on July 1st. So phase 2 will be addressing non-equivalency items and the State Environmental Policy Act. So that during ecology's review period, we'll be tackling some other things that aren't directly related to ecology permit equivalency. There's some things related to the combined system, looking at mainline extension requirements, looking at what the flow control standard or threshold should be for the combined system, and then updating our sizing factors. You may have noticed if you skim through the red lines that there's a bunch of placeholders in the tables right now for the pre-size factors, and that'll be something that we'll be tackling during phase 2. Also some technical editing, and that's mainly just consistency, making sure we're using consistent terminology throughout the document, and then SEPA, as I mentioned. So ecology has through November to review the manual. Hopefully they'll get us comments back before then, but then it'll be out for public review once we're able to review ecology's comments, incorporate those new phase 2 items. There'll be a second public review period that you can also participate in, and we'll mention that again towards the end of the presentation, but that'll be either late fall or early winter, depending on when we hear back from ecology. Phase 3 and phase 4. So phase 3 will be the legislative process and adoption, and that will occur in the spring of 2021. That'll be taking things through city council review, having public hearings, things like that. And then phase 4 will be looking at implementation tools. So we're kind of working on that throughout the project, identifying what types of tools would be helpful to help support the manual and applicants and plan reviewers. So those will be started to be rolling out in the spring and fall of 2021. I think that's my last slide. So that's a little bit on the project background. I'll pass it back to Gretchen.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And now I'll turn it over to Sherelle to present on the code updates.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And I just wanted to note one thing about, and I apologize if you're going to go through this bit. We were talking about the time series and changing possibly the time series for the modeling, and that would possibly affect the sizing factors in the manual, but you can touch on that more later. But I just wanted to make sure that we covered that. Anyway, I am going to go over the key stormwater code changes. I'll just remind you that the authority to regulate stormwater in the city of Seattle comes from the Stormwater Code, and so that's why we're starting with the code. And as you know, a lot of the items, or may not know, a lot of the code is inserted into the Volume 1 manual, but the code, the Seattle Municipal Code, is where the authority is, and so should refer to that if you're looking for something in particular that isn't in the manual. So, and then the Stormwater Manual, which is the director's rule, further interprets the authority in the code. And so, again, these are proposed, and most of these changes are related to equivalency. And I will highlight these items, and then Matthew and Rebecca will make some additional comments on some of the things I'm covering. So quickly, some of the items, we have new exemptions for, and I'll go over these in more detail, but new exemptions for certain types of land disturbing activities. There's some alternative compliance requirements or equivalent area mitigation that ecology is having us change. I'll go through the definition changes, as well as source control best management practices. There's some changes proposed on the on-site lists, as well as equivalency-related wetland protection standards, as well as defining preliminary drainage review requirements for master use permits. So as far as the title, scope, and authority goes, we've to remove barriers to some of these retrofits or projects that are either improving water quality, flow, or removing pollutants. We've added some new exemptions from the minimum requirements for remediation projects, as well as stormwater retrofit projects. In addition, we've updated, and I've noted this, that ecology is asking us to add some additional language regarding alternative compliance. So we've updated that section for equivalency to ecology. And we also added some clarification regarding utility installations and as it relates to start of construction. And also, we just added updated that source control may be required in the combined for certain activities. So as far as definitions, I'll first go through the new ones and then the revised ones. So for the definitions, we have added a new hard surface and a new impervious surface definitions to be consistent with ecology, and that incorporates the changing surfaces from gravel to asphalt is considered new. And then as well as we just added non-listed creeks as a definition, just to be consistent in the manual or in the code, because we have listed creeks as a definition. We've updated several definitions, existing definitions. One is the definition for aquatic life use. Initially, or currently, it has only freshwaters considered as having aquatic life use in our definition, but we've added marine waters to the definition, which will affect enhanced treatment requirements. We did a minor name change in the construction stormwater control plan definition. We've added definition for development, and the changes are to be consistent with ecology's definition, including adding subdivisions and short plats, and noting that development is a type of project. We've changed effective impervious surface to effective hard surface. We changed master use permit. There was a definition in the stormwater code that was slightly different or different than what is in the land use code. And just instead of having a separate definition, we're just referring to the land use code. We also updated pollution generating impervious surfaces changes and having to do with pedestrian ways being separated from drainage or from roadways, as well as adding and making it clear that rail lines, railways, including such as light rail, are also considered pollution generating. In addition, we clarified that if you have an area that is pollution generating that isn't currently going to a drainage system, but that is replumbed one way or another, and goes to a drainage system, that is considered new pollution generating surface. We updated the definition for project to be consistent with ecology and noting that development is a type of project. Again, and we also updated project site to be consistent with ecology. And in the replaced impervious surface and replaced hard surfaces, it We clarified what down to the foundation means. For sidewalk projects, we clarified that if you are constructing a roadway, you're not a sidewalk project. And for the definition and for single family residential project, we added that and clarified that associated detached accessory dwelling units are still under the single family residential project definition. And finally, for site, we made changes to be consistent with ecology as well. For minimum requirements for discharges, all discharges in all real properties. I first want to note that there's no changes to the prohibited and permissible discharges proposed, but for 22803, we do have a couple changes. We added new BMPs for source control for all real properties that include rooftop dog runs, fueling associated with dedicated stations, mobile and in and over water, fueling, maintenance and repair of vehicles and equipment, and concrete and asphalt mixing, production, and pouring, and a couple minor changes in that, name changes in that section as well. So as far as the overall, I think next slide. As far as the overall minimum requirements for all projects, for general requirements, there's a new section related to closely related projects that may be determined to be one project if they meet certain thresholds. This mirrors other code language that is in Seattle Municipal Code, in particular evaluating SEPA and drainage review. Design review. We also add a new section clarifying about drainage control plan review and having it clarifying that it is required from us, and also looking at the entire project to determine thresholds. Additionally, we also added that for certain stormwater facilities that serve multiple properties, there's requirements for those to be built ahead of those further projects being finalized. And the last two items that I just mentioned, Matthew will discuss in a little more in detail. And two changes in the single family, or changes related to on-site stormwater management. In the single family project section, and the parcel-based project section, the terminology when a lot size is changed, the terminology changed from reduced to altered. Other thresholds that were added to be equivalent to ecology about increasing runoff during the 100-year recurrence interval, flow frequency, and then finally there's requirements associated with protecting wetlands, and those updates were based on equivalency requirements from ecology. For roadway projects, the proposal is to change the flow control thresholds to be based on new hard surfaces and instead of replaced hard surfaces. This would match ecology's requirements. Related to on-site stormwater management and the lists, I'll go through these really quickly, but I also have the tables that I'll follow through in more detail. But some of these changes affect all of the lists, and there's been changes to categories, the BMPs, and in addition of adding a new sidewalk trail BMP, and as well as adding trees to roadway and sidewalk trail projects as a requirement to be evaluated for the on-site stormwater management list. So this is a screenshot of the parcel-based project list, and I've highlighted in green what the changes are in those words that I just were on the other slide. But basically, the infiltration trenches and dry wells, it basically now says that for surfaces, you can use infiltration trenches and dry wells, but you're not required to evaluate them for surfaces. So if somebody wants to, but because of pollutant concerns and the like, or long and linear projects, the requirement to evaluate for surfaces is optional as opposed to a requirement. And this is consistent with ecology's requirements.
And that's the ground level surfaces as
Yes,
opposed to the roof surfaces.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that, Matthew. So then the sidewalk in category 2, we added a sidewalk trail compost amended strip. This is basically a similar to like a CAVS that WashDOT uses. I apologize for the acronyms. But it's a compost amended strip for trail and sidewalk projects. And it's on the same level as permeable pavement. And so this is something that we need to take to ecology for approval. So this is definitely proposed. But that you'll find that BMP in the manual in volume 3. Another change is that for non-infiltrating bioretention, we moved non-infiltrating bioretention and vegetative roofs down to category 4. And the reason for that is the non-infiltrating bioretention, we're proposing sizing to the water quality standard as opposed to the current on-site list sizing. And the items, the dispersion items in category 3 are all ecology requirements. So they're often not feasible in an urban environment like Seattle, and also they're less expensive. And so moving non-infiltrating bioretention and vegetative roofs lower, I think has little impact to how things pan out on a project. In addition, since we created moved non-infiltrating bioretention and vegetative roofs down, we had to create a new category 5, and in that we just changed trees to or newly planted trees to trees because replaced trees also count towards the on-site list. So, and just to see what this roadway projects, this also would apply to trail and sidewalk projects, similar type as adding that sidewalk trail compost amended strip in the same category as category 2 and permeable pavement. Again, this is something that has not been approved by ecology. And also at the bottom, adding trees to the bottom of the list for roadway projects and trail and sidewalk projects. So, and then to meet equivalency, we added, let's see, where am I? Oh, we added requirements on various for wetlands that are based on ecology's requirements, equivalency requirements. And most of these requirements would have to be determined by wetland biologists through a wetland report. And like I said, the reason we did this is because ecology has a new method of determining what type of flow control and monitoring is required, and it's dependent on different types of the class and type of wetland, habitat and habitat score, and the presence of breeding amphibians, and those are all from ecology. And depending on what type you have and different parameters, you might have to do method 1 flow control or method 2 flow control. The method 1 flow control involves a year monitoring and including wetland stage modeling. And it typically applies to the class 1 or class 2 wetlands, and it has to be a depressional or riverine impounding wetland. And the project proponent basically has to have legal access to the wetland to be able to do the monitoring. And as I mentioned, you would have to do 1 year's worth of monitoring and evaluating water level fluctuation and water holding capacity. If those aren't applicable, then you would most often have to do a method 2 flow control, which would apply to other types of wetlands. That is if they have a habitat score of I think it's greater than 5, and the presence of breeding amphibians, then the wetland standard would be the number 2, which is the same as what we're doing right now. And I'm almost out of time, or I'm out of time, so I'm going to hurry through this. And I think that I have my last slide here. And for the treatment section for projects, we added that marine waters also may trigger enhance based on if it's a commercial industrial project, and or multifamily is now changed. That is, it defines a parcel-based project that includes, that constructs 4 or more dwelling units would also be required to meet enhanced treatment. And that 4 or more dwelling units is based on ecology and their response to comments and requirements and what they have in their manual. So, okay, I think that is it.
Thank you so much, Sherelle, for the update.
Oh, I have one more. I apologize.
Okay.
Cheryl, you're doing fine on time. I have you at 15 minutes right now, so you're good. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Good. I think I thought, never mind. So far as key stormwater code updates, the drainage control review and application, again, just in the application section of the code where it says what has to be applied, what has to be submitted, we just further defined the preliminary drainage review plan. And then there's a few changes of when standard drainage review plan is required. And then this is just in terminology. The large project is now called a comprehensive drainage review plan. Just in the code, it said large project, and in the manual, it said comprehensive drainage review. So we're just aligning the code with the manual because that's what people are used to using. And now I think I'm done.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sherelle. And just want to remind folks, if there are points of clarification, questions that come up as the presenters are walking through the various proposed updates, please feel free to put your question in the chat function. And we will also have a Q&A at the end too. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca and Matthew on getting updates on the key stormwater manual changes.
And I just realized I had the poll still open, so I just closed that. So sharing who's with us today. So we've got primarily consulting engineers. We've got a few landscape architects with consultants and a few engineers, planners, and other from city and counties. We've got 1 general public and 6 other. I didn't put a field there for filling in what that is, but yeah, pretty good mix of folks on the line today. I saw a comment pop up in the chat. Is that something you want to read, Matthew, or you want to take that at this time?
What is the updated time series and sizing factor impacts to sizes? Our facility is getting larger or smaller. We haven't decided on the time series yet. And so I think the idea would be something that would be equivalent, but it would incorporate some of the climate change that we've seen. So it could make facilities a little bit larger. With that being said, for on-site stormwater management, we're looking at making the non-infiltrating bioretention smaller. We can talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Matthew. I just saw it pop up and then I couldn't see it on my screen because I'm sharing my slides. So thanks for reading that and responding.
And I think, yeah, I think most of these we can probably just do during the Q&A, I think.
Okay, great. All right, Gretchen, should I take it from here or did you want to do a transition?
Yeah, you can take it from here. So yeah, we'll just be hearing from both Rebecca and Matthew on this section, and they'll be walking through the key stormwater manual changes, proposed changes.
All right, great. Thanks, Gretchen. So talking about the stormwater manual, this is just an overview of what the manual looks like. So for those of you that are familiar with the Seattle Stormwater Manual, the structure hasn't changed. So we still have our same 5 volumes that we had back in 2016. So we'll be walking through kind of the key changes related to these topics. I'll note here, and also when we get to that point, that volume 5 is just a placeholder right now. So there's no new language proposed right now for Volume 5 enforcement, but that's something that we'll be working on during Phase 2. So that'll be something coming out in the fall for review. But if you open that volume, you'll notice it's just a placeholder page right now. And then the appendices. And Matthew will be speaking a little bit on master use permits as part of the Volume 1 update today. So some of the key changes in Volume 1, if you've had a chance to take a look at that summary of changes that's posted online along with the Redline manual files, that provides a pretty good overview, but just wanted to hone in on some of the key things that have been updated or clarified or added. So as Sherelle mentioned, this kind of aligns with what's in the code, so clarifying definitions and providing some new examples for single-family residential, parcel-based projects, and special circumstances projects. So that expanded some of the text related to special circumstances projects in section 4.7. So some of those things that Sherelle mentioned. So if you're developing multiple blocks, if you're discharging to closed contour basins or multiple drainage basins, or discharging to subbasins within the public combined sewer system, those would now be considered special circumstances projects. Also consolidated the requirements for land disturbing activities. So these were different project types back in 2016, and they've kind of been rolled up into one section now. So that includes utility projects, pavement maintenance projects, and then a couple new sections on remediation projects and structural stormwater control projects. And then adding right now, there's a placeholder for the landscape management plan. So for those of you that are familiar with the King County Surface Water Design Manual, that section is kind of modeled after what King County has in their manual. So that's up for ecology review as a proposed change in section 5.4. We also added a reference to BMP T540, preserving native vegetation. That's in ecology's stormwater management manual for Western Washington. And another big change related to Volume 1 is removing the concept of basic treatment receiving water. So that's something that's proposed for pulling that out. Another thing I wanted to point out on this slide is that the code language in Volume 1 right now is a placeholder. So if you're interested in the specific code language, it's been grayed out, and there's a note there referring you to the Redline Stormwater Code for those changes, and we'll update that in the final manual, but until then, we're still making code changes at the same time, so we didn't want to pop in that new language until it gets finalized. And also throughout Volume 1, we've also updated internal and external references and web links. In Chapter 8 specifically, a couple things that Sherelle mentioned during her presentation, so related to drainage control review and application requirements. There's a new section 8.1 on preliminary drainage review. And then there's a new requirement in section 8.4 related to upstream analysis. And we've also updated and clarified existing submittal requirements in section 8.2 and 8.3 related to standard drainage review and comprehensive drainage review. And Matthew can definitely speak to questions on those since he worked on Chapter 8. So with that, I will hand things over to Matthew to give us a brief overview on the master use permit updates in the draft manual.
Okay, so master use permits, so they're basically just a land use permit issued by SDCI, and there's a huge range of what that permit may be. It could be a short plat, a major institutional master plan, or it could just be a sign approval. Our current code just says that MUPs require drainage review, so we wanted to provide some clarification and provide consistency of which MUPs get review, how you review them, and clarify some of the requirements. So we've added this new preliminary drainage control review section that applies to MUPs. And we're going to clarify exactly what types of MUPs will regularly get drainage review. And we're also establishing some requirements for shared drainage facilities and subdivisions and short plats. Go to the next slide. So the preliminary drainage control review. So we've got it in the section in the manual, or in the code section here and the manual. So basically, you're going to need a preliminary site plan, preliminary drainage control plan. And that plan needs to include estimate of all your hard surface coverage that's in the associated development. And that's what will be used for determining your thresholds of flow control, water quality, etc. And if applicable, a preliminary drainage report. Since there are a lot of different types of MUPs, we're going to planning on doing an appendix that would get into more detail for the different types of MUPs and what's expected. Next slide. So here's a list of the MUPs that will typically require preliminary drainage review. These are the ones that would always get routed to our drainage review group. So subdivisions, short plats, lot boundary adjustments, major institutional master plans, major phase developments, cluster housing developments, and any kind of ECA variance, exception, or other type of approval. You see I have an asterisk by the lot boundary adjustment. So that's a one where you typically wouldn't need a preliminary drainage control plan unless you need to demonstrate adequacy of drainage. Next slide. So here's kind of some examples of MUPs that would not get drainage review typically. Now we would still reserve discretion if there was a concern about adequacy to do drainage review. But SEPA review for buildings, design review for buildings, change of use, shoreline substantial development, planned residential and downtown development. These are MUPs that we feel that we can fully do the review in the construction permit. It's not necessary to do a preliminary one up front. Okay. And one of the big clarifications for short plats and subdivisions, if there's going to be a shared drainage facility, that may be a detention tank that serves multiple lots. So now we have a new code section saying that there's a choice. You can either build that before recording the plat, or we would put a condition on the plat so it could go ahead and be recorded, but then you would have to have that drainage facility permitted and constructed before you can sell any lot or parcel from the subdivision, or and prior to the inspection of any of the other building permits in the subdivision. And that's mainly just to make sure that huge subdivisions aren't split up and then sold off, and then people find out, oh, they can't do anything until they build this massive detention tank. And so that sums up my part of the MUP, and I can take more questions later.
Great, thanks, Matthew. So now I'll shift in a little bit to talking about the Volume 2 updates. So Volume 2, the updates were relatively minor. A lot of those were related to kind of terminology consistency and minor BMP revisions for consistency with Ecology's Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. If you're interested in specifics, you can take a look at that summary of changes table that I mentioned that's posted along with the manual red lines, and pages 6 through 8 focus on the BMP revisions. I guess the one larger one was the split of 2 BMPs, so concrete handling and concrete washout area were lumped together in the previous manual, and those were divided out for consistency with Ecology. So those are now C 1.56 and C 1.58. Along with Volume 1, there were also updated internal or external web links and other minor terminology updates and clarifications throughout Volume 2, but relatively minor changes there. Volume 3, some of the key things that were updated included some guidance related to the infiltration investigation map. So there was some confusion on how that might be applied. So in section 3.2, some clarifying language was added there to describe how that should be applied. Bypass flow through and offsite flow general design requirements for online and offline BMPs. Those are clarified in section 4.2, and some updates have been made there. We added some modeling guidance for projects that are located in closed depressions, and that can be found in section 4.1.3.4. And then, as Cheryl mentioned earlier, there's the new BMP in chapter 5, sidewalk and trail compost amended strip. So that's something that's proposed to Ecology that we're hoping to get adopted. And then figures are listed here under added, but there's also updated figures as well. So that should probably appear in both categories, but there's a set of red line figures that are posted primarily in chapter 5 of volume 3, but you can take a look at the changes that are proposed there. They're in the red line format, so they're a little messy now, but in the final manual, they'll be cleaned up in CAD and they'll look a lot nicer, but this way you can tell what's being proposed for changes. Clarifications in Volume 3 include the minimum investigation and testing requirements for shallow infiltration BMPs. So that's Table 3.1, has some updates in it. Also some clarifications to how you would implement the on-site list approach in Section 3.3.1, the on-site performance standard in 3.3.2, and flow control in 3.3.3. Some clarifications on the modeling approach in Chapter 4 in Section 4.1.3. And then clarification on pre-settling and pre-treatment requirements in Section 4.4. The next 3 slides are just intended to be an overview. There were a lot of changes that were made throughout the BMP sections for clarification and terminology and updates to design criteria. You can take a look at the summary of changes table, page 9 through 13 for some more information on that. So the next 3 slides, I just tried to highlight kind of where some of the changes are, you know, in the columns we have here: setbacks, design criteria, modeling guidance, operation maintenance, and figures. So in this first subset of BMPs, you know, lots of changes in the design criteria and changes to figures, you know, not a lot of changes in setbacks and O&M here. One thing to note related to rain gardens is that there were a lot of right-of-way setbacks in there formerly, and we pulled that out and just referenced the CAM instead of having that in there specifically. So making sure that, you know, we're not duplicating things that are repeated elsewhere and maybe updated elsewhere. The second subset of BMP is listed here. So again, lots of changes throughout the design criteria, for clarification and updates, changes to the figures and O&M were some of the key areas here. Detention pipes, we wanted to call out specifically that there were a few changes you may want to take a look at. We did take a clarification in terms of what is required for manifolded detention pipes, so minimum 24-inch diameter connections. You can take a look at that on page 5-160. The access requirements for detention pipes and also any underground structure have been updated throughout Chapter 5. So there's some new and updated requirements there, and also requirements related to exfiltration testing for detention pipes. That's under the minimum construction requirements on page 5-162. A few BMPs that are not listed here, there were only minor revisions to infiltration basins and detention ponds. And those were just external references to the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, minor edits to detention cisterns, and no edits to single-family cisterns or other detention options. On this third slide here, the subset of BMPs we have are kind of the water quality treatment or non-infiltrating BMPs, changes in the site considerations and design criteria and figures were the main aspects here. For non-infiltrating bioretention, we wanted to highlight that a liner is now required. So that's a section you may want to take a look at. That's on page 5-181. A few BMPs that are not listed here, biofiltration swales and stormwater treatment wetlands only had minor edits related to terminology and consistency with the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, and combined detention and wet pool facilities did not have any edits. So it's not listed here. And then you'll note on the matrix that there were some changes in the proprietary and emerging water quality treatment technologies as well. One technology had been added, but it wasn't added consistently throughout, so that got added in that section. I think that's my volume 3 in a nutshell. Obviously, lots of changes throughout, but hopefully they're pretty clearly identified in the red lines and in the matrix to help focus your review. For volume 4, that's focused on source control. We updated, clarified, and added required BMP elements and recommended BMPs. Again, a lot of that was driven by updates in the ecology manual. One BMP that was added that Cheryl had mentioned was the rooftop dog run BMP, new BMP number 8. So that's something that's not in the ecology manual, but is a city-specific BMP. And then one BMP was removed, and that was the lot maintenance and storage BMP, because a lot of that was already addressed under BMP 7, and it seemed kind of duplicative to have a separate BMP for that. So Cheryl mentioned some of these earlier, but I wanted to list them out here. These are the 8 BMPs that were shifted from the Chapter 3, which was business and public entity BMPs for specific activities, and these got moved up to Chapter 2, which is BMPs for all real property. So there's a few that are focused on fueling. BMP 11, that in-water and overwater fueling doesn't have any city-specific requirements, but refers you to the Ecology Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. There's a couple related to concrete and asphalt production and application. And then we've got our maintenance and repair of vehicles, equipment, storage of liquids and above ground takes, and recycling, wrecking yard, and scrapyard operations. So there were just some BMPs that it seemed like should still have requirements for all properties in the city. So those got moved up to Chapter 2 and will now apply in more cases, in more projects.
Rebecca, I just want to point out that so these they're not just that they're going to be for all real property, but these previously weren't required in the combined sewers. Right. So these also will now be required in combined sewers.
Yeah, that's good. Good to define that all real property is basically your separated system and your combined system. And then once you get into Chapter 3, that's just looking at just the separated system. So. As we mentioned earlier, the Ecology added quite a few source control BMPs to their source control volume. So those got added here. Majority, or I think all of these are actually just references to Ecology's manual. So instead of repeating the same text that's in Ecology's manual, it just provides a reference to the 2019 Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington for specifics. That's volume 4. I mentioned that volume 5 right now is just a placeholder page, so that'll be available in the next round for public review. I wanted to briefly step through some of the key changes in the appendices. Appendix A right now doesn't require too much review, just a placeholder page, and take a look at the draft stormwater code to take a look at what those definitions are, and then we'll reflect those in the final manual and in the manual as well as the code. Appendix B, this is one that the content got deleted because currently we're referring to Ecology's BMP C250. So it's kind of duplicative content. It didn't really make sense to update it since we kind of default to Ecology's BMP there. So we deleted the content there, but as Matthew mentioned, we'll be updating or keeping Appendix B, but in the future it'll be submittal requirements. And we'll working on that as part of the phase 2. So that'll be out in the fall for review. Appendix C, some changes here. So new infeasibility criteria for consistency with the on-site list calculator. So there are a couple things there. There are also some new infeasibility criteria for all BMPs. So BMPs that would require pumping, that's now an infeasibility criteria. If you're unable to maintain 36 inches between the BMP and the property line for a side yard setback. And if you're unable to maintain clearance for ingress, egress, or ADA pathways. So take a look at those. There's a few changes there, but something that would impact projects and would be good to have that in mind for projects moving forward. And then some revised categories for consistency with the proposed stormwater code updates. So as Cheryl mentioned, things got shifted around a little bit in the list. So Appendix C also got updated to reflect those shifts in the lists. For Appendix D, that's looking at the subsurface characterization and infiltration testing for infiltration facilities. Here we clarified the roles and responsibilities of licensed professionals in the first section, section D1. Also updated documentation requirements and infiltration testing procedures that's located in section D2 and D3. Added a requirement for vertical separation for groundwater mounding in D7. And then acceptance testing criteria requirements and submittals in section D8. Related to the documentation requirements, those got updated for most types of reports that would be submitted. So that includes the simple subsurface investigation report, the standard subsurface investigation report, and the comprehensive subsurface investigation report. And that acceptance testing D8, that's a new section. So that's all new text there. And we worked with a couple of geotechnical professionals on making the updates to this appendix. In Appendix E, that's kind of our placeholder where there's a bunch of additional design requirements related to primarily to Volume 2 and Volume 3. We updated and clarified design criteria in sections E1, E3, E4, E5, and E6. Clarified when each type of liner applies in section E7, added a new figure, rectangular not sharp crested weir, which I think was actually in the 2012 manual, not there in the 2016, and now it's back again in the 2021. Impermeable liners got added in section E7, and some general planting design principles got added to section E9. In Appendix F, there aren't a lot of changes right now, but a couple of things I wanted to highlight. There's a note in there right now regarding the approval status of MGS flood. As you may have seen on Ecology's manual and on Ecology's website, it's not currently approved for modeling bioretention. So there's a note in Appendix F regarding that. And I believe I also added that to Volume 3, just as a reminder that it's still not approved for modeling bioretention, but you can use it for other BMPs. And then there's notes in there regarding the evaluation of tidal influence, sea level rise, and climate change, and that work's currently in progress. We talked about that a little bit at the end of the code and as we were transitioning into the manual slides, but right now the city is evaluating replacing the 158-year precipitation time series with a 40-year precipitation time series, and is also evaluating a perturbed 40-year precip series to look at future climate scenarios. So that work is in progress and will be incorporated as part of phase 2 if we decide to move forward with any changes there. Also updated the runoff curve number table for consistency with Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. Not sure how many of you still use curve numbers, but they're in there and the table's been updated. That's table F18. And then similar to the other volumes and appendices, the internal and external references and web links have been updated throughout. Appendix G, some pretty minor edits here. This is the operation and maintenance requirements. Added the modular wetland system O&M table. Right now there's a modular, or there's other proprietary BMPs in there, and this one got added. So we added a table in Appendix G related to that. Also some usability improvements in Appendix G. So there's now a kind of a clickable links, a table of contents at the beginning to make it easier to navigate through that appendix. And with adding that new table, things got renumbered toward the end. Some other minor terminology and reference updates as well. Appendix H only had one minor edit, so you don't need to worry too much about that. Appendix I, the integrated pest management plan had no changes, so no edits there. And I think that is my manual and appendices in a nutshell. So hopefully that was a good overview, but definitely take a look at the red lines available online and the summary of changes document, and let us know if you have any specific comments on any of the edits proposed.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And now I'm going to walk through some of the next steps related to this effort, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And we've been getting some questions via the chat function, so we'll go there first, and we'll start addressing questions that we've been receiving. So in terms of next steps, we are currently in the first public review phase for the draft 2021 Stormwater Code and Manual. And public comments are due by Saturday, May 16th. You'll note on this slide, there's a web link to SDCI's webpage where the documents are posted. And please use the comment spreadsheet on SDCI's webpage, as well as email the completed spreadsheet to the email address listed on this slide. The city will be reviewing all comments received and submitted by the May 16th deadline, and will make any needed revisions before submitting the document, associated documents to Ecology by July of 2020. Ecology's review period is through November of 2020, and then there will be another round of public review in late fall 2020, early winter 2021. Which will be the next opportunity for you all to provide any additional input that you might have. The legislative process will occur in the spring of 2021, with the new code taking effect by July of 2021. And with that, we are going to move into the Q&A portion of the meeting. And just a quick reminder to those, we've got on here to use either the chat or hand raise function to submit questions or comments and or requests to speak to the group. So we'll be monitoring both the hand raise function if you'd like to verbally ask your question or provide a comment, And we'll also be looking through the chat function as well to answer any questions that you all have. And the first question that we received was a question from Lily. Does down to the foundation include projects like Key Arena, where the roof stays, but the bare soil is also exposed? And Matthew, you were going to address that question.
So we didn't address that. So we currently consider that that is not new and replaced if a hard surface remains over the top. The clarification was just saying that down to foundation means that if you you have to remove it down to bare earth or subgrade. That's a little bit of there's been a little bit of confusion on that when you talk about down to the foundation because it could be people define that in different ways. But I like to describe it as if a raindrop can fall straight down from the sky and hit bare dirt or subgrade soil, then and you put something back, then it's replaced.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matthew. The next question we had was from Payal. The stormwater code has been expanded to include public combined sewer. Can you elaborate on the applicability of the code on drainage systems versus public combined sewer? Same applicability question for volume 4 source control BMPs.
I can take it, this Sherelle, I could take a stab at that, and then if Matthew wants to weigh in, that would be great. Well, just in general for history, the city of Seattle has had a stormwater code since 1979, and our stormwater code has applied to both the combined and the separated drainage system. So it isn't such a change, or it hasn't really been expanded. It's always included the public combined sewer. As far as source control, there are some BMPs like fueling that would apply to both the combined and the stormwater system. We obviously don't want fuels in the combined system, and having that switched and making sure that we're having those types of source controls like for fuels, islands, and such apply for both the combined and the separated system for safety and other reasons makes sense. And Matthew, if you want to weigh in any further.
No, I think that you covered it.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question we have is from Jennifer. Can liner requirement driver for non-infill BR be described further? If subsoils don't infiltrate well, can liner be removed?
I can take that one. So that let me, Rebecca, are you able to pull up the revised code, the volume 3, page 5?
I could do that if you want to, start. I can jump out of this and see.
Okay. So page 5-181.
Okay.
So what we've done is we clarified when there's 3 different types of liners that may be required for non-infiltrating bioretention. There's a complete impermeable liner or a low impermeable liner, and it depends on where you are. If you're within a setback where normal infiltration wouldn't be allowed, then you have to do an impermeable liner. Concrete is not considered an impermeable liner, and so that's why there'd be a new liner requirement for concrete non-infiltrating bioretentions that are up against a building, which includes most non-infiltrating bioretention. Now, if you're far enough away from a building, then this section shows that you can use a low permeability liner, which could even be a clay liner. I'm double checking now.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that the crux of it is that if it's next to the building, right, having some type of impermeable liner is the change, the bigger change. That would,
Right.
and or yeah.
And we've classified that concrete is not an impermeable liner, it's a low permeability liner.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to look at the steep slopes and things like that as well, is where this would play into it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that covers it.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks both. The next question we have is from Dan. Is there a publicly available rationale memo for the compost amended trails being proposed to ecology?
Not yet, no. It's in the works, but it is not available at the moment. But it will be.
Okay, another question here from Payal. Also related question, drainage system is deleted for BMP number 2 under 22.803.030B, and volume 4 BMP2 has added language on public combined sewer. Are those changes for BMP2 different than the rest of chapter 2 BMPs?
Can we come back to that one? Let me look at that for a second.
Yeah, of course. And then also same participant, same question, or different question, same participant. Also related to 22.803, this time 040, minimum requirements for source controls for specific activities. For all discharges, except those that drain only to the public combined sewer, the text in quotes is deleted. This is more of a comment than a question. It makes it seem that volume 4, chapter 3, BMPs apply to areas discharged to the public combined sewer as well. Anything you want to add to that?
I would say that the intent is that there are some BMPs that would apply to the combined, depending on the activities that are happening on the site. And that's the code and the manual in volume 4 are reflecting that some real properties that go to the combined would have source control requirements, but not all of the source control requirements apply. And again, like fueling or other types of activities with concerns about fluids and such going into the combined. And Matthew, do you have anything else that you want to say? Kind of
and we already do have a lot of BMPs that are required in the combined, just general practices. And so this kind of just clarifies that there are some BMPs that will apply in the combined.
Great. Thank you. A question here from Bethany. Why are we hampering possible infiltration of non-infiltrating bioretention? For instance, if we're under the 0.3 inches per hour measured, but there are no other reasons why a non-infiltrating bioretention cell is being proposed, no combined contaminated soils / groundwater, shouldn't we be promoting any infiltration that is capable, but sizing per non-infiltrating bioretention cell with a raised overflow under drain?
I think that it's only in, Matthew, you can correct me, but isn't it only in areas where there's concern, like it's next to a building or in a steep slope or those type of things is where we're talking about the liner, or maybe that's something that we need to clarify. But I think that is more the intent. Matthew, is that correct?
For the liner, yeah, that is the case. But for infiltrating BMP, we do have these minimum infiltration rates. So if you want it to act as an infiltrating BMP, we want to know that it's going to work well.
Yeah, I think we can look at that. I think we should look at it and see if the concrete is going to let some water into the soil, even then, but we're not relying on the sizing of that, but it just could happen. I think that's Bethany's point. But if not, please make a comment on that and make sure we're getting it correct. But is capable sizing.
Great, thank you.
So we'll see. I think I'm missing it, but yeah, we'll look at that further.
Yeah, Cheryl, I think I might have a response to this. I mean, the infeasibility criteria doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still do an infiltrating BMP, even if it's below that 0.3 measured. So I would say in this case, if you can do some infiltration and you don't have any concerns that you would need a line or anything like that, I would say follow the infiltrating bioretention. It would be slightly larger, but you're still infiltrating in that case. But yeah, you wouldn't be worried about having a line or anything like that if you were doing the infiltrating bioretention. So I would say follow that section, even if you're under the 0.3 doesn't mean it means you don't have to do it, but you still could do it if you make that case, right?
We should look
back to
back
that.
at this.
Yeah.
I think this is a good comment that we should look at
Yeah.
because other parts of the code say that you can't do it if it's less than 0.3. So, and it definitely wouldn't count toward your on-site stormwater management.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely add that to the list to discuss further. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great, then we've got a comment in here that I'll just quickly read to see if you all want to weigh in on now. It's more of a comment than a question from Stephen. I'm not up to speed on the code, but I'm not seeing adequate mitigation of construction compacted soils. In my opinion, wood chips amended deeply into soil and planting area can rival rain garden capacity far better than compost amendments or mulches. Also, detention ponds would benefit if significant additions of wood slash chips slash logs on the sides of ponds could recreate the fungal network that is a live conductor of water to surrounding trees, which have their own water holding capacity and transpiration benefits. Anything you all wanna add in there? Again, more of a comment than a question.
I mean, I think it's a very good comment, and I agree with it. And I think we have looked at wood chips, so we can take that into consideration and if further. So thank you for that comment.
Great. And then a question here from Lily. Please clarify whether the CB requirement for bioretention, will the CB need to be a city standard CB, or can the CB for an on-site bioretention be in the right of way? Is this 2-foot sump within the detention tank considered equivalent?
I'm not exactly sure of the question, so Matthew, do you know?
Yeah, so a catch basin, like if you have a catch basin that's downstream of a bioretention, that I think we clarified in here that would be required. So private catch basins, there's some leeway of what that is, and that's actually defined in the side sewer code, or the side sewer director's role. And we are pretty flexible about that as long as it has a sump. But a private catch basin could not be in the right of way. So I think Lily's probably asking this about zero lot line projects, that this could be a little bit tricky.
Thank you. The next one, groundwater mounding language is not consistent with ecology. We would like more information on the basis for requiring the mound to remain 3 feet below the facility. Sherelle, Matthew, Rebecca, anything you want to add there?
I don't, well, Rebecca might have more, but I feel like there was a lot going around that. I feel like that was ecology that made us do that, but I have to look at that further. We had a big, long discussion with them about that, but we can definitely check on that.
Yeah, I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but we'll definitely add that to our list to take a look at.
Yeah.
Great. Next question from Jennifer. For the trees BMP, does that also apply to preserving existing trees? And if so, is there a minimum caliber diameter?
Yes, and yes. And yes, there's a retained trees and new trees. But yes, the retained trees has a caliper and what counts for it and different types. And then in the right of way, there would be feedback from urban forestry if we're talking specifically about the right of way. But yes, that is included in the code, in the manual already about tree size and caliper.
Next one from Payal, just to clarify, do volume 4, chapter 2 BMPs apply to combined and separate systems, and chapter 3 BMPs apply to separate systems only? Looking for confirmation to understanding which source control BMPs apply where.
I'd have to get back and look at that and double check. I wasn't a lead on that. So I don't know if Rebecca knows the answer or if we could just.
Yeah, that's the way that, I guess I've done a lot of training on Volume 4, and that's the way that I've interpreted, and I believe the way that the Volume 4 lead has outlined it as well. So Chapter 2 would be, anywhere in the city combined separate, and then Chapter 3 would just be separate systems only. So that's correct, how you have written.
Thank you.
Great. Those are the only questions that we've gotten so far via the chat function. We do have some more time to take any more questions that folks have, either if you'd like to raise your hand or submit additional comments, questions via chat. Rebecca, Sherelle, or Matthew, anything that you didn't have a chance to say that you'd like to circle back with the group on?
Only that I just really want to hear what people have to say and if they can really articulate articulate their comment, but also suggestions are really appreciated. If you have a way of phrasing something or something in general, a different way of doing something, please articulate that very well. That helps us a lot, and it'll get closer to what you're looking for oftentimes. So.
Great. And then there's a request here from Robin if we're able to send the Q&A after the meeting. And this whole presentation has been recorded, and so we'll be posting it to the SDCI website. So you'll be able to access the Q&A portion after this call on that.
Yeah, and I see that some people haven't had the chance to review the actual changes yet, but like I said, we're going to have our second public meeting, which is going to be covering the same type of same topic and same information. So if you, in the meantime, have time to look at something and you want some clarification, you can come back.
And another question did come in from Bailey. For non-infiltrating bioretention planters, the updated figures show that bioretention soil thickness can be reduced to 12 inches. Is there a different list approach sizing criteria for this?
Rebecca, do you know, or Matthew?
I don't know. I don't think we've looked at that yet since we haven't done the sizing yet. Is that right, Rebecca?
Yeah, I believe we made the edit in the text, but the sizing hasn't been updated yet. So that's a good reminder to take a look at the 18-inch as well as the 12-inch. So
that would probably impact the flow control, the pre-sized flow control, I would guess.
Any other questions that folks haven't had a chance to ask yet? Okay, well, we want to thank everybody so much for participating in the call, for posing questions that you had, points of clarification. Want to remind everybody that the public comment period is open through Saturday, May 16th on the SDCI website. Please, if you have a chance between now and then, to email any comments via the spreadsheet that's on the website as well. And we've got the the contact information for both Sherelle and Matthew up on the screen too. And just really want to thank you all for your participation in the call today, and stay safe and healthy out there.